murder, death, and the dead. My father was causing a scene as usual, slurring his words and attacking pew after pew of terrified mourners who had gathered for his funeral. I was in the meat locker, unhooking the next carcass when I ran into my shift supervisor, who should have been on vacation, as well as right side up. The body on the autopsy table was riddled with bullet wounds, large chunks of flesh missing and his face more mush than man, and yet, he was halfway to standing back up. I was shivering, soaked head to toe, hearing her say something about starting a nice warm fire, but I was too overwhelmed by the fumes to notice her striking the match. The skin on both my hands felt tight, like skin often does after a sunburn, so I continued searching my collection for a better fitting pair. I was anxious to reach my destination on time, sighing with relief when I heard the train approaching before taking my seat between the tracks. When I saw those dead eyes staring back at me, I let out an involuntary shriek and slammed the door, for that was the last thing I expected to see in my date's fridge. I stared out over the cliff to the gorgeous view, her gentle hands on my shoulders, but I only realized why she'd insisted the hike would be worth it once she pushed. The fact that my boyfriend made such a good living off his handmade lampshades was less surprising than how long it took for someone to notice the freckles. Impossibly tight and well out of earshot, the abandoned home's crawlspace was the most perfect hide-and-seek spot Stephen had ever found. Not a single mourner disagreed. I'd always known birth was painful, but what I hadn't known was that the mothers kept screaming long after you'd cut it out. One whiff of the decayed stench coming from the basement and I was drenched in cold sweat, not for fear of what might be causing it, but because it reminded me of what I'd done. I trembled as I peered through the closet's slats, watching it breathe heavily, until I decided it was time to finish off my victim. The barber brought out his straight razor, ready to begin shaving the face of the unfortunate woman strapped to his chair. It's fun blowing bubbles, just not while living out your final moments underwater. I didn't remember much about before I was taken from my parents, but I knew I was smarter than any of the kids in my new school when I got an A+ for my class project, whose brains were still oozing out onto the floor. I had never crowd surfed before, and just when I was starting to enjoy the feeling, I was lowered to the ground, allowing everyone the chance to trample me as planned. My husband was half an hour into a well-deserved soak in the steaming tub, but his skin was only just beginning to prune, so I decided I needed stronger acid. Among the worst parts of finding myself dangling from the noose was that it wasn't tied to anything. The butcher hacked at the meat, holding out a fresh cut for me to inspect, asking me if I wanted to select which part of my body was next. I watched the lifeless face through the flames as I had countless times before, except this time, it was from the wrong side of the cremation oven's door. I stayed after class because Mummy told me to always be nice and Mrs. Chadwick was crying and said I was sweet and she just had a bad day, but I didn't want her to cry, so I made her stop and now she can never cry again. I reached out as she fell, managing to get a firm grip on her hand, but it was no use, since my feet had already left the cliff's edge. "I'm a bit of a celebrity," he repeated, but this time, she believed him, his handsome face appearing on the TV screen right next to those of his victims. family, friends, love, and relationships. Nothing could tear us apart. She'd sewn too many parts of us together. I'd been burned, buried, shot, stabbed, drowned and disemboweled, but no matter how much they tried, my family couldn't save me from what I'd become. My mom tucked me in, kissed my forehead and told me she loved me, which was when I knew something had taken her place. "We're going to be a family," I whispered as I observed the smiling faces of my future wife and son from outside the house. My friends warned me that he was two-faced, but I didn't believe them until the real one ripped itself free. I felt my husband's warm arms wrap around me from behind, which would have been comforting if I hadn't been laying across from his cold body. She hugged me tighter, soothingly hushing my cries until with a loud crack, she absorbed my broken body into hers. My wife was silent and obviously furious as we pulled away from the daycare, but I had to check the back seat to confirm the very thing I couldn't convince her of, that the adorable little freckle of our daughter's nose had changed sides. "I don't usually go this far on a first date," she giggled, briefly letting me gasp for air before pushing my head back underwater. It was an awkward reunion. After all, we hadn't seen each other since he died. I stroked her hair and ran my thumb gently across the down of her temples before I kissed her for the first time, deeply, eager for the rest of her body waiting on the other side of the room. I followed the trail of dirt and footprints until I found my husband setting up a camera in the living room while inviting me to take my place for our annual family portrait to the left of our putrefied son. She had nervously insisted on turning off the lights first, and as I kissed my way up from her body to her lips, she finally found the courage to touch one of my tentacles. "I didn't get in," I told my parents after reading the letter in silence, and as supportive as they acted, I knew that even if I did, they still wouldn't have let me leave my cage. The escalator was moving smoothly, its machinery unimpeded, which was unfortunate since it had already ground half my friend's body to a pulp. Though my new husband forbade it, I took his absence as an opportunity to explore his expansive trophy room, admiring the atrocious beauty and stroking the heads of countless well-preserved beasts until my hands came upon an empty mount with my name on it. I now knew the tree was a terrible place to hide from the storm, and if Ash could speak, my friends would have agreed. "You'll be going home with them," my foster mother wept, nudging me towards the woman who pinched my cheeks, looked up to her husband and hissed, "Meatier than the last." "I want you to look me in the face," my best friend repeated, but I'd already tried once, and all that had been there was a ragged, gaping hole. I was begging her to forgive me, crying, telling her I didn't want things between us to end like this, but she'd heard enough, and continued cutting. My boyfriend's hands tentatively touched my body, and as he pulled me closer, I remembered he'd been dead for years. I'd given all the blood I could to save her, my head spinning and my body weak, but I knew it wasn't nearly enough when I saw her lips form one final word: more. I watched my wife lift my son off the ground, no different than 10,000 times before, save for setting him gently down on the bear trap. All my traumatized parents could ever muster was that my brother suffered terribly and had died long before I was born, And the explanation was enough until the day I found him under our house. I'll never forget the stifling heat as I waved goodbye to my son alongside the rest of the village, watching with a mix of pride and sorrow as he took the final steps of his journey into the volcano. Standing here at the altar should have been the best moment of my life, but the pale face behind the veil was neither my fiancé nor human. "I'm so impressed," she shouted when she saw how far I'd squirmed without the use of my arms and legs, and I cried like an infant when she effortlessly carried my limbless torso back to the nursery and whispered, "You've left me little to remove, but I'll make sure you don't leave your crib again." This spine-chilling horror stories are also available in audiobook, hardcover and paperback on Amazon and in Goodreads. Make sure to check it out. Links are in the description box below.